You are welcome. Winnie, how are you?
I'm well. I'm at a funeral right now, but I stepped out so I could join.
Okay. Josiah, you are welcome.
Thank you.
Amen. Yeah, we are here once again. Dr. Boyson, you are welcome. Now, let's get going. Let's read the text for today, and then we'll zoom. And it came to pass that as he was come nigh unto Jericho, a certain blind man sat by the wayside begging. And hearing the multitude pass by, he asked what it meant. And they told him that Jesus of Nazareth passed by. And he cried, saying, Jesus, thou son of David, have mercy on me. And they which went before rebuked him, that he should hold his peace. But he cried so much the more, thou son of David, have mercy on me. And Jesus stood and commanded him to be brought unto him. And when he was come near, he asked him, saying, what will thou that I shall do unto thee? And he said, Lord, that I may receive my sight. And Jesus said unto him, receive thy sight. Thy faith hath saved thee. And immediately he received his sight and followed him, glorifying God. And all the people, when they saw it, gave praise unto God. Amen. Mama Doris, it's been like 2 million years since we last heard or saw you. You are welcome, Mama God.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks, Pastor.
Very refreshing to hear your voice. Okay, today I'm going to introduce this group to an interesting way of looking at text. You can help use it in any aspect of life, whether Bible, the work you do, anything actually. It will even help, not even, it will help you mightily to understand the AI we are so crazy about in our contemporary world. The point I'm making is AI actually comes directly from the Bible. So let's look at something. And it has to do with the same things we've done. We are going to look at the sentences. And what I'm introducing you to is the fact that you are going to understand we are pursuing two types of sentences. Every sentence is a sentence. But with what we are doing, we are going to identify sentences that identify action or specify action. And then we are also going to identify sentences that spell state of affairs. So every sentence is a sentence. A text is made up of sentences. So this story from Luke 18:35 to 43 is a text, but it is made up of sentences, right? Like we've always known. And in actual fact, there are 26 sentences here. So you know the way we do our calculation. You have close to 68 million ideas in here to mind. But that is not what we are just looking at the number of sentences, 26 of them. And what we are going to do is identify which of these sentences actually tell us about action being performed by an agent, a character, an individual, an actor, or what. And then which action or actions let us know the state of affairs. So let's look at examples. In verse 35 of the text we read, it starts by saying, and it came to pass that as he was come nigh unto Jericho, a certain man sat by the wayside begging. So let's identify the sentences there. I took out two sentences. The first one says, Jesus came near to Jericho. Do we agree that's a correct sentence? Do we agree? From verse 35.
Yes.
Jesus came near to Jericho. Is that a good sentence?
Yes.
Okay. The second one is a blind man sat by the wayside begging. Is that also a good sentence? Winnie, do you agree that's also a good sentence?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll take those two sentences and ask ourselves, of those two sentences, which one tells us about the state of affairs and which one actually tells us about an action? Jesus came near to Jericho actually tells us about an action that has been performed. Do we agree? Do we agree? However, a blind man sat by the wayside begging. It tells us about the state of affairs of a blind man, not an action he is performing. Mama Doris, you agree?
Yes, Pastor.
Okay. Now, very important ideas to learn. Why is this important? Why would it and how would it actually help us to understand texts at a very high, very deep levels? When you pair the two sentences in the same verse, now this is the key. Every state of affairs is only changed by an action. Let me repeat it. A state of affairs, which is the same as a condition. So this blind man sitting by the wayside tells us about the condition of this blind man, right? It tells us about the state of affairs of this blind man. The state of affairs of this blind man can only be changed by an action. So in verse 35, we have an action, Jesus coming near to Jericho, and a state of affairs, a blind man sitting by the wayside. Does that mean the action is going to affect the state of affairs? Possibly yes, possibly no. So we have to keep reading and see how or where is this state of affairs that we've identified is changed by an action in the text, or whether the action we've identified in verse 35 changes the state of affairs that we've identified in the same verse 35. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. So what we are trying to do is now we realize that words put together, thoughts put together, actually are not arbitrary. They are there to perform or to perform certain things. So, pair the two. Jesus coming to Jericho, which is an action, is it going to change the state of affairs of a man in Jericho? Because for both sentences to be located in verse 35, in actual fact, will force you to realize that the blind man also was sitting in Jericho. He was sitting by the wayside in Jericho. And so this text starts as of the interaction between Jesus's coming near to Jericho and the blind man being in the same place as Jesus. But the blind man is not performing an action, but showing a state of his life or a state of affairs. Is one going to affect the other? Now, the second principle you also have to understand, an action does not directly trigger another action. An action will lead to a state of affairs, and from the state of affairs, another action is triggered. Are we getting the interesting way texts are supposed to work? So let's keep going. The Bible now tells us in verse 36, the next sentence we get from it, the blind man heard a multitude passing. Do we agree? That's a sentence from verse 36. Do we agree?
Yes, Pastor.
Okay. Do we also realize the same 36? The man asked what it meant. That's also a sentence. Do we agree?
Yeah.
Do you realize that both sentences are action sentences? Do we agree? He heard, he asked. They are both action sentences. Winnie, you agree?
Yes, I do agree. That is
Okay.
very.
Now our principle kicks in. We said an action does not trigger another action directly. An action must first trigger a state of affairs, and then the state of affairs will trigger another action. Very interesting. So in verse 36, you have two actions, which therefore means we must identify the state of affairs that the first action triggers, from which the second action is triggered. So you read it like this. When the man heard that a multitude was passing, what effect did that create in him for him to ask for meaning? Mr. Josiah, are you getting the way this test works?
Yes, I'm following.
Whenever you see an action, ask yourself, what does it trigger? So when you see a sentence that only gives you a state of affairs, your next question is, what action triggered that state of affairs? And one action can trigger many state of affairs. We will learn these truths. And one state of affairs sentence can also trigger many sentences, many action sentences. So now reading is taking on a whole new level. And that takes writing, the ability to write and ability to understand, to an unprecedented level. And I can assure you that is the specialty of the Bible we read. So, if we identify that verse 36, one action, the blind man heard a multitude passing, we have to supply the trigger that the state of affairs that it triggered. And then, once we identify that trigger state of affairs, we can now segue into the action sentence that flows from there. So here we are. Jesus has come to Jericho, an action. A blind man is sitting by the wayside begging, a state of affairs. But we don't know whether Jesus' coming did anything to the man's sitting. We don't know that yet. However, verse 36 tells us that a crowd was passing by, and we know by reading the whole text that this crowd was following Jesus. Do we understand that?
Yes.
Okay. So now we realize that Jesus and the multitude, they passed by, and then it changes something in this man, because the man asking, the man hearing of the multitude passing by is an action, and therefore we must ask ourselves, what condition of state, right? A state of affairs that is first triggered by what Jesus and the crowd must have triggered for out of which this action by this blind man is triggered. Very interesting. So now we have the man sitting, Jesus and his people, they are passing by. So that's an action. The man is sitting. The passing of the feet, which is part and parcel of Jesus's coming, actually changes the state of the man by sitting. Therefore, we have to ask ourselves, how and in what way did it affect the man sitting? Yeah, it affected him because now he was able to hear. So, which state of affairs sentence can we insert in that will flow from an action sentence? For this man to now ask, right? Sorry, for this man to now hear of the movement of Jesus and the crowd. And then for him, the hearing of that movement of Jesus and the crowd also leads to a state of affairs. That state of affairs now triggers an action which is now asking a question. And then the next thing, the crowd answers this man. So the next question we ask, when the man asked the question, which is an action sentence, an action cannot trigger another action because the reply of the crowd is an action, and therefore it cannot be triggered directly by the man's asking a question. Unless we are able to establish a state like when the man asks the question, a duty was invoked in the crowd for them to answer back. And when they answered back, and the content of that answer is that Jesus is passing by, what condition or state of affairs does it trigger in the man? For him to now perform another action, which is shout, Jesus, thou son of David. And then when he shouted, Jesus, thou son of David, have mercy on me, which is an action, what state of affairs does it create in the crowd for them to rebuke him, which is an action? And then what does the rebuke of the crowd trigger in the man as a state of affairs for him to shout the more? And then when he shouted the more, the Bible tells us that Jesus stood. So you realize that the first time the man shouted, Jesus didn't stand. It was the second time he shouted that Jesus stood. Winnie, are you following the interesting way this is turning out to be? Now, when Jesus stood, which is also an action, right? What did it create as a state of condition in Jesus for him to now ask for the man to be brought to him. On and on and on and on and on. Whoa. So with that understanding, let's come back to the beginning and then trace our way and see the revelation that begins to flow out of this whole text. As part of it, one thing we are also going to learn is the knowledge that a character brings into the equation that will establish the state of affairs that can also change or trigger an action. So, the first thing we want to ask here, when the man heard the passing of the crowd, why didn't he ask for money if he was indeed a beggar? But he asked for meaning. Josiah, you want to take a stab?
I'm still processing it.
Last week, we scratched the surface. Madam Doris, are you there?
Yes, Pastor.
Can you check the meaning of the word meaning? Because that's what the man asked for. The blind man asked for meaning. Do we agree? Because he asked what it meant, right? So he asked for meaning. Do we agree? So check. I can provide the definition. The word meaning means, no pun intended, a message that is communicated, but it's not expressly given out. Meaning is a message that is communicated without being expressed. For example, when you read a book, the author hardly will tell you that I'm writing about physics. But the content will give you the understanding that the real meaning of the book is about physics. Do we understand it?
Yes.
So, when the blind man asked for meaning, he was seen for what? The message that is being communicated by that act by the crowd. So when the crowd said, Jesus of Nazareth is passing by, get the clue. They gave him a piece of knowledge. Do we agree? And that piece of knowledge was that Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus from a town called Nazareth, was passing by. So the crowd told him of an event. An event is the same as an action. And that piece of knowledge activates something. We have the condition. Now we have a trigger. Now this blind man is told Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus from an insignificant Jewish town, is passing by. What did the man shout? Verse 38. Can somebody read? What did the blind man shout?
Okay, I'll
He
read it.
said,
Verse 38.
Yeah.
and
Luke
And he
chapter.
cried,
Go ahead.
and he cried, saying, Jesus, thou son of David, have mercy on me.
Jesus, thou son of David, have mercy on me. Is it the same thing he heard from the crowd? Was what he shouted the same thing he heard from the crowd? Statue, is it the same thing he heard? What he shouted, was it the same thing he heard? Obviously, they are not. They are two different things. But they reference the same entity, Jesus. Winnie, do you agree?
It's possible. I mean, I think he was just the loudest.
Say that again.
I think he was the loudest.
We have
We don't
to.
know. We don't know what exactly the other.
No. Look at what is there. The crowd. What did the crowd say was happening?
This is Luke what?
Verse 37. That's what the
Yeah,
crowd.
what chapter?
Luke chapter 10. Luke chapter 18.
Um, yeah, he cried, "Son of David, have mercy on me."
And that's verse 38. What he cried, was the content of what he cried the same as the content of what he heard?
Oh! I thought you were asking what the multitude was crying out. No, it wasn't the same.
In verse 37, what was the content?
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. That's what I'm saying. It's different. He
Thank
heard
you.
Jesus of Nazareth and he cried out,
Okay.
Jesus, son of David.
And then he shouted, Jesus, thou son of David. They are two different things, right?
Mhm.
Oh. Now the second thing, he said, have mercy on me, which in Israel you could only use for God. Right? So look at what the man said, blind man sitting down, what he heard, and what he shouted. What did the crowd pass on? The crowd passed on about a man who had a relationship with the town, Nazareth. And if you know a thing or two about Nazareth, the Jews have no regard for Nazareth at all. One, they said nothing good can come from Nazareth. Two, that a prophet could not come from Nazareth. All these are statements in the Bible, in the New Testament. When Nathanael was told about Jesus, he said, can any good thing come out of Nazareth? And that was what the crowd knew. And that was the information they gave to the man. The man shouted, Jesus, son of David. Whoa. Do you realize that the title son of David is the title of the Messiah? Do we get the picture?
Yeah.
You know that fact, right?
Yes, yes, I do.
Okay. So now this blind man has recognized that the Messiah of Israel actually is passing. The crowd only saw a man. The blind man saw a Messiah. But both referred to the same entity, Jesus. Now, he also said, have mercy on me, which is something only associated with God. Now, get this picture clear. The Jews never said the Messiah would be God himself. So when this blind man added, have mercy on me, he went beyond just a Jewish Messiah. Now, let's skip all the way to verse 41. This blind man also said something. When he was brought to Jesus, Jesus said, Jesus said, what wilt thou that I shall do unto thee? And this blind man said, Lord, capital L, O-R-D. Who does the word Lord refer to?
God himself.
God.
Are you getting what is happening here? Now the question is, when did this blind man learn all this? Because nowhere in the text have we been told that he learned each of these prior, and he learned each of these in the course of this text. Andy Norris, are you appreciating the interesting thing?
Yes, sir.
So now we have to go back and package our knowledge properly, right? And we put time marks around these knowledge pieces. So when we take this all, you realize that we've been given multiple knowledge pieces about the same entity called Jesus. We know he was from Nazareth. We now know he also was the Messiah as of this time. We know he was God Almighty himself. We know that he can have mercy. Right? All these pieces of information were known to this blind man before this text starts. Which is to say, the blind man knew what the crowd knew. Do you agree?
Yes, I agree.
And Josiah, since you code, and for anybody who understands coding, this is what we call equivalence, right? Which is to say, the name or title Jesus of Nazareth is equivalent to Jesus, son of David. Right? It is equivalent to the Lord. Only if you also know that all of them refer to the same entity. Right? But if you read this text carefully, you realize that the crowd actually rebuked this blind man. And this blind man being rebuked rather shouted the more instead of holding his peace. Winnie, are you getting the complication?
Yeah, I understand.
He was supposed to hold his peace. He rather shouted the more. Right? Now we come to this interesting thing. The Bible tells us that the man was begging. Question, was he begging for money? Asaph, verse 35. Do you think he was begging for money? Knowing all this that you know. Josiah, you think he was begging for money?
I don't think, after all that you have said, I don't think he was begging for money.
But if you didn't know these steps we've just learned, you think this man was begging for money, right? That doesn't mean he
Yes.
wasn't begging for money, but now all of a sudden you are being compelled to take a second look at that claim. Doris, would you agree?
Yes, Pastor.
Okay, now I've done enough talking. We'll have 4 or 5 more weeks to deal with this, so I'm not going to, literally force more knowledge into your throats. The test, ask questions. Let's now learn some deep stuff in text that authors, and especially this Bible, can hide. I've opened your eyes to even how ordinary sentences, they play different roles. And so that from now on, your first business, whenever you have to read a text, identify the sort of role a particular sentence is playing. And don't forget, a sentence is a unit of thought, right? So now we can say, when I am thinking, which thought units inform me about the state of affairs, and which thought units inform me about action, and how one affects the other. We said an action on event changes a state of affairs, because an action does not directly trigger another action. An action must first trigger a state of affairs, and out of the state of affairs, an action is triggered. So as you read any text, every text, work-related, whatever, apply this skill. And you see yourself actually beginning to understand things at a higher level you never thought was possible. Any questions?
Please, I have one question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, I mean, as Christians, we believe that the work of Christ is essentially about salvation. That's what we believe, that
Mhm.
the work of Christ is essentially about salvation. And we
Mhm.
see in this scripture, like you mentioned, the equivalence thing where Jesus of Nazareth is equivalent to Son of David, and also equivalent to Son of Man, which are all references to God. So essentially, is a man crying out unto God, asking for mercy. And I I mean, if you look at the verse 42, Jesus' response after after giving him, saying that you received thy sight, thy faith has saved thee. I
Uh,
thought I just want to ask, is it one of those those situations where the text may also be referring to, the work of Christ, salvation, and all those things? Like, is this one of those texts? Because it seems to me like that way.
you are now gaining some serious insight. We thought Jesus saves, which is true. But now Jesus is also telling us our faith can save us. Think about it. The man asks that I may receive my sight, right? And then Jesus now talks about the man's faith that has brought him salvation. Is Jesus saying we are responsible for our salvation here?
Yes,
Brutal.
we are.
Probably. Yeah.
Thank you.
There's no probability in
Thank
that.
you. Thank you, sir. Thank you. And what brought about this man's salvation? The faith. But what actual? Jesus said it's your faith, but it was the man's knowledge, which is now trying to tell you faith is also equivalent to knowledge. What has been the practice we've been exposed to? Leave everything to God to do. Right? Isn't it what we've been bred on? Faith means leaving God to do it. True or false?
True.
I would say faith is then having sufficient knowledge, not necessarily all knowledge.
Say
Because
that again.
I would say faith is like you have to have sufficient knowledge, but not necessarily all knowledge. Because there is an aspect of faith where you may not know everything.
Well, I agree, but the point I'm making is all of a sudden we are realizing it's like our contemporary experience, very little emphasis on knowledge. Almost every time, prayer, miracle, what have you. True or false? I'm not saying these things are not important, but I'm saying that the more we read the text, the more we realize that maybe we are not being faithful to the text. That's just an observation of mine. Right? Because, yeah, I mean, Jesus said it is your faith that has saved thee, which is Jesus saying, you thought I will save thee. Your salvation is in your own hands. And how have you brought that salvation about? By the knowledge that compelled you to act the way you did. Is that sinking in?
Yes, it's sinking in.
Now let's go back again back to verse 35. Was this a blind man begging? Does this begging actually mean expecting to be for alms to be doled out to him? And all of us said, now we are not too sure about that. True or false?
True.
Now, whenever an author starts this way, the author will give you more information. And I've told you in previous times that when an author wants to control the meaning, he gives us additional facts. Right? He gives us additional facts. So we come back and we are asking, we are putting everything together. Now we realize that, he was sitting by the wayside, right? What is a way? In actual fact, if you look at Mark's account, he was sitting by the highway. And if you keep reading, you realize that this was a way that leads from Jericho to Jerusalem. And from there, Jesus will be moving to Jerusalem. So this man was sitting. And so what is a highway? A highway is nothing but a road that takes you from point A to point B. True or false?
True.
So the text is rather creating a picture for us that now the way from point A to point B was available, but the man was sitting, no movement. So the way requires movement for things to happen, but the man is sitting. So the highway and then sitting, the two together would create a certain imagery that is very jarring. Movement and lack of movement. Because when you are sitting, you are not moving. True or false?
A physical movement, no.
Whether physical, but when you are sitting, let's get the literal meaning. When you are sitting, can you sit and be moving at the same time?
No, not realistically.
So when this author, Luke, now tells us there was a highway, but the man was sitting, it means the answer could be there, but no action on the part of the individual will render the highway practically irrelevant. True or false?
That's true.
Now, can you apply the principle here to life? Do you realize that the multitude could move? They were using the highway, but they had limited knowledge. Somebody who is not moving, right, is blind, has more knowledge than this crowd. Look at the contrast. right? Jarring picture. Winnie, are you appreciating that?
Yeah, it's we wouldn't expect it. It's paradoxical.
Yeah, that's quite a hard picture, right? Quite a picture to paint. And Luke is doing in fact, the whole Bible, this is the tone, this is the style. Any questions? As I said, I'm not going to introduce new stuff because today you've learned some pretty hard stuff, right? I will expect you now, try and apply it in your readings. Next week when you come, you would have gained some new skill, and then we can add more to it. Any questions? Ma Doris, any question?
No, Pastor, thank you so much.
Okay. Josiah, any question?
No questions.
Winnie, any question?
No, please. No.
Okay. I would also end here. It's 2 minutes after 8. I don't want to stretch it. Mama Doris, please, you have been away for 11 centuries, so you have the honor to pray, give us the final prayer, but give me a minute